Hi everyone, this is John Gamble from Corelight. We'll get started in just a minute. I'll be on mute for the next minute, but we'll be started in 60 seconds. Thanks. All right, welcome to today's webcast. My name is John Gamble. I'm a Director of Product Marketing here at Corelight, today's webcast sponsor, and I'm very excited today to present Carson Zimmerman, who will be talking about world-class cybersecurity operations and the strategies for achieving them. He's got a wealth of experience in this regard, so I would definitely encourage you to take advantage of this in the Q&A section that will be at the end of this presentation. So just a bit of housekeeping. Your GoToWebinar panel has a question box where you can enter in questions during the presentation, and we will save 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this presentation for Q&A. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Just a brief note about us, Corelight, today's webcast sponsor. You may be familiar with the Bro Network Security Monitor. It's an open source framework that does network monitoring. It comprehensively generates logs across more than 35 protocols, giving you in-depth, rich information for security use cases such as incident response and threat hunting. And it also does file extraction. And if you know Bro, you may know that it can be somewhat challenging to set up and manage from an open source perspective in large environments, and that's where Corelight comes in. We built a commercialized solution that takes care of a lot of the headaches of managing open source software with Bro. And we've also added a suite of enterprise features to make it really easy and simple for you to deploy and enjoy the rich data logs and file extraction that Bro is capable of. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Carson, today's star. Thanks, Carson.
Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me all right?
Hear you just great.
Outstanding. So a little bit about me before I get started. I work for Microsoft today. I'm a SOC engineering lead. Been with the company for coming up here on 2 years. Previously, I was with MITRE, worked many years in SOCs of one sort or another. I started as a tier 1 analyst, as many folks do, but most of that time was as an engineer of one sort or another, and those experiences led to the presentation I have for you today and a book I wrote on the topic, which I'll show you a link to at the very end. I'm required to tell you that this presentation incorporates elements of work developed by MITRE on behalf of the US government. Much of this material is copyrighted by MITRE. They have licensed it to me so that I can present it to you. So thank you, MITRE, for allowing me to continue talking on this topic. I'm also required to tell you that my comments today do not constitute the official position of my current or former employers and don't constitute an official endorsement of any particular vendor. So with that, I'm going to get started. So when we look at security operations centers of today, we have a sea of sensor data, plenty of awareness about cyber, plenty of money being spent on it, thousands, tens of thousands, et cetera, of professionals out there who work in the area of cybersecurity. Many folks who are very worried about getting hacked or have been hacked. There are dashboards and metrics galore across a variety of technologies I can go by, and a river of threat intel. Yet, every SOC I go to, new or old, large and small, I hear quotes like the ones you see here. Quotes that to me suggest folks continue to have pretty basic challenges with getting the mission done in a security operations center. Disconnects between operators and engineers, inability to deploy or maintain tools, inability or roadblocks in the ability to effectuate both preventative and responsive capabilities, personnel challenges, the list goes on. So these challenges and at least how to start addressing them are the content of my talk for you today. My intent here is to talk about the qualities of what a world-class cybersecurity operations center looks like and feels like, at least in short. I'm going to talk about issues that cross people, process, and technology issues. But perhaps more importantly than that, a lot of folks, when they address cybersecurity operations, they talk about internal TTPs, internal techniques, tactics, and procedures of the SOC, whereas I'm going to focus equally on the external factors for success. Now, to talk a little bit about tomato, these organizations that I'm referring to, which I'll describe in just a little more detail in a second, go by many names. Some people use the word SOC or CSOC, CCERT, CCERC, CERC, blah, blah, blah. Everyone has a different name, but ultimately it's a set of analysts assembled to detect and find bad guys on networks, on hosts of all sorts of different types. That mission, just so everyone here is kind of on the same page, this is probably review for most folks. The mission of this organization is as follows. You have a set of folks who are assembled to prevent incidents through some kind of proactive threat analysis, monitoring of IT assets for threats, detecting and analyzing potential intrusion activity, potential incidents on and against those threats and analyzing that, responding to it either through coordination and decision support, sometimes directly, sometimes not, and providing situational awareness and reporting to their management, to those that they protect, we'll call them our constituents, and operating and maintaining and engineering the tools necessary to accomplish those missions. Now, a SOC can come in different sizes. There are SOCs as small as one person. They are as large as several hundred people, and they vary a lot, based on a lot of issues. I could probably have a whole talk just on how to size a SOC. I won't today. What I will say is that generally, in a defensive capability, you need to see the roles depicted at the right in some form or fashion. You need tier 1 folks who are responsible for triaging reports of incidents and data that suggests intrusions have occurred. You need folks responsible for analyzing that data in depth and supporting incident response. You need folks who are responsible for maintaining and operating those capabilities. And you need folks who are responsible for tuning those systems and integrating all that information about the adversary. So when I say SOC, I mean all of that stuff. I mean the people, the technology, and the processes accomplished to do these things. And what follows in my presentation is I'm going to dive into 10 strategies that I have found and I have seen many other people use to effectively accomplish the cybersecurity operations mission, meaning finding bad guys and doing something about it. So the first goes like this. We want to have, ideally speaking, all elements of cybersecurity operations under one roof. And those include those pieces I just mentioned and that are shown here in this cartoon org chart. Why do we do that? Well, ultimately, we want one team working against one set of operational priorities and one mission. We want to synchronize their operations. We want to close the loop between folks working at different parts of the mission, different parts of the stack. For example, when someone in a response role closes out an incident, we want what they've learned to be provided back to the folks doing the triage for those alerts. Just one example. In all of this, we want to improve all key areas of their operations: detection and response, analytic tradecraft, the unity of effort across the team, the economy of force needed to achieve whatever thing we're trying to do, and meaning can we, if some incident response took months to achieve, can we do it faster or easier next time, and provide the same situational awareness across all of these folks. What I have found is that when you pull any of these functions out of the SOC organization, things generally don't tend to go very well. And I'm going to talk to you about some of those key decisions here in just a second. The most important reason why we do this is this. When we take the adversary's TTPs, against techniques, tactics, and procedures, and lay them across the cyber attack lifecycle or cyber kill chain, depending on what you like to call it, what the adversary does, but perhaps more importantly, the manner in which they do it and their adaptation in the way they do things can be measured in anything from seconds to years. It's necessary for the SOC to organize themselves in a manner that keeps pace with their adversary. In other words, are they operating in the same OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, the same OODA loop, the same decision cycle as the adversary? Because if they're not, and they're not adapting in those same time scales, they're losing. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is how do we organize the SOC to maintain parity or and have better situational awareness and better turnaround of both their perceptions and their ability to adapt than the adversary. One of the pieces that people usually ask me about, by the way, is when we talk about security operations in the supporting engineering function, which, by the way, I am a SOC engineer by trade, so this is a dream I've lived. I see many patterns and anti-patterns, particularly as follows. We see when we put a wall between operations and engineering, as if there could be one, and trust me, I've seen situations where there are. We see a lot of anti-patterns. We see us versus them. We see tool requirements codified in contract language that takes years to change. I see requirements and solutions thrown over brick walls, tools forced upon the operators, operators that may be forced out of necessity to act as cowboys, beg, borrowing, and stealing of resources, and perhaps, in the most extreme examples, no risk acceptance, meaning no ability to be agile. We don't want any of that. What we'd rather have is a situation that fosters operators, meaning the analysts, and engineers working together. And sometimes, by the way, in small SOCs especially, the analysts and engineers are the same, one and the same person. And sometimes you have a spectrum. We want them to support changing requirements as the mission changes, iterative requirement development and satisfaction, joint decision making, a CM process that fits their needs, probably a lightweight one. We certainly don't want folks running around like cowboys. Designated budget for the SOC tools and technologies, and a risk profile that is ultimately managed, again, in a manner that's harmonious with the mission and the changes of the missions. So there are a lot of different ways to approach this solution space. One of them is that the SOC simply owns all of it. It owns the people and the budget to do it. If not, if the engineers are somewhere else, we want to see them permanently matrixed to operations or some kind of rotation capability. And we want requirement specialists in operations to make sure that they are holding the engineers accountable to whatever projects they have going on, regardless of where the engineers may reside. Now, someone usually also asks me the question, not usually when I'm doing a webcast, though usually in person, what about firewalls? Great question. You're probably thinking that right now, aren't you? Well, let's talk about that. So there are a variety of inline devices that someone in the enterprise should probably be managing and operating. Firewalls, IPSs, proxies, the list goes on. What to do? So on the one hand, the SOC could take this on. This means they have more control over these defensive measures and can manipulate them as they see fit, particularly to prevent or respond to an intrusion. But trust me when I tell you, and whenever something goes wrong, they're usually one of the first people to be blamed. Oh, those firewalls, they're making our lives hell. They need to be taken off the network, or they need to be turned to accept any. Or how dare you collect our logs? They're adding 0.0001% CPU utilization to our domain controllers. You don't get any more logs anymore. Trust me, these things happen. On the other hand, if we put them in another area of IT operations, such as the NOC, it's less operational burden from the SOC. They don't get blamed as much, but they have less control. I love it when I call someone who's responsible for maintaining a network IDS and say, hey, we'd like to update our signatures today. And their response is, what are signatures? Not good. So the keys here are a couple things. First of all, regardless of the approach you take, the SOC should have other parts of IT operations, such as the NOC, on speed dial. It helps if they're organizationally or physically adjacent. And even if they're not, regardless of whether they are or they are not, we should think about something written down to describe the service level agreements that they have to one another. Moving on. So strategy number 2. It may sound crazy, but we need to give the SOC the authority to do their job. And we want to write them down. I know it sounds crazy. You're probably thinking, of course they should. Trust me, I worked with many SOCs that have almost none of their authorities written down. And it becomes a real problem, particularly when, I don't know, a major incident happens. So in short, we want a set of governance of some sort that says the following. Number 1, the SOC is the one and only organization responsible for incident detection and response across their constituency. And there's some caveats to this, by the way, which I'll talk about when I talk about tiered and coordinating SOCs in just a second. Number 2, they are able to be the decision authority for incident response, meaning when we go into major incident response mode, they're the one calling the shots. Number 3, they are at the bare minimum a participant in decision making for things that will prevent incidents, such as pushing patches or firewall blocks. Number 4, they are able to communicate with whomever they need to. Number 5, they are able to acquire, engineer, deploy, operate, tune, upgrade, etc., 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 their tools. Funny story, I've run into SOCs that don't have root or admin on their own SIEM or IDS systems. And I ask them, so how's tuning going for you? And they say, it's not good. Number 6, they should be able to collect, retain, and share relevant digital artifacts, network traffic, log data, hard drives, etc. Usually lawyers get involved here. And I've heard of stories where a lawyer would say, oh, IP addresses are PII, personally identifiable information, and you can't retain any PII longer than 72 hours. I say, well, how's that going in terms of your ability to investigate old incidents? They say, oh, it's a problem. Not good. We want lawyers that hopefully interpret the relevant laws, statutes, regulations, etc. in a saner manner than that. With all of this said, we want to exercise these authorities with great care and precision and respect for the mission of the organizations we are protecting. Number 3, and this is a big one. We want to balance the size of the SOC with their agility and visibility down to the edge. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, and something I've learned of many folks I've worked with, the further the analyst is from the things that they monitor, be it host or network, the poorer their understanding is of what is normal, and therefore their ability to understand what is abnormal on those systems and networks. This is crucial. Let me show you why. On the one hand, we want a SOC that's really big. It has a huge constituency of millions of hosts. They have consolidated authorities and resourcing, and they have the ability to sustain a coherent cadre of folks who specialize in all the things that it takes to do security operations. On the other hand, we want a set of folks that have that visibility and understanding down to the edge. And they're able to use that and work with the agility and relevancy necessary to understand what's going on, analyze intrusions, and effect the appropriate countermeasures when called for. Again, we're going to talk about countermeasures later. That could be anything. It's not just blocking stuff. So the question is what's that balance? That balance means different things for different people depending on the scope of their mission. Let's talk about that balance in terms of their size and balancing that with agility and visibility. If we look at cyber situational awareness, we break that into 3 pillars: network, mission, and threat. Network situational awareness is what's going on in the bits and bytes on the networks and hosts that are happening. Mission situational awareness is the connection between what's going on in those bits and bytes to the relevancy and what's going on in the mission and the business of those systems. We're putting it in the context. And then finally, threat is all about the adversary, understanding the adversary. What are they doing yesterday, today, and what might they be doing tomorrow? And consider, for example, that the adversary may also be our own employees when they are acting as insider threats. We think about the size of a SOC in terms of its constituency. We think about those areas of situational awareness. Network and mission areas, a very large SOC has very wide but very shallow situational awareness, whereas a very small SOC, their focus is narrow but deep. With threat situational awareness, generally folks with a very small constituency have very little time to be concerned with what particular campaigns are happening against, for example, their area of industry or business or government or education. Very large SOCs, by contrast, have the ability to have a pretty comprehensive understanding of what's going on. So, and in addition to that, our response time tends to vary as well. So the question is for different SOCs, particularly whether they're coordinating national SOCs, large government SOCs, multinational corporation coordinating SOCs, or whether they're folks smaller, how are they gonna do this? How big is too big? How do we harmonize situations when SOCs are tiered, particularly, again, in areas like the government? How can national CERTs or CSOCs or CERTs, whatever you're calling them, best support their constituents? How do they do things differently? How do they do things differently than their constituents? Should they be responsible for analyzing raw data? Probably not in most cases. Should they be purveyors in threat intel? Absolutely. And how small is too small? When should we outsource? I covered that in Appendix A of the book I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. How small is too small? Can you even support a cadre of folks? Good question. Another talk for another time. Number 4. There's all these different things a cybersecurity operations center can do. I've shown many of them on the slide here. There's only 3 things that they must do necessarily to be called a SOC. They must be able to accept incident response from their constituents. They must be able to effect some kind of incident coordination and response capability, and they must be able to distribute the results of those activities back out to their constituents. That's it. If you read the CSERT RFC from many years ago, it was almost 20 years ago now, those are really the only 3 things that you need to do in order to be called a CSERT traditionally. So the question is, all this other stuff, what do you do? Because you can't do all of it. You don't have all the money to do all of that. So what do we do? Well, here we go. So if we look at the capability and maturity of SOCs over time, we can start telling this story. At the bottom left, you're probably working with a bunch of fairly basic technologies, and your processes are ad hoc. They're not measured. And as we ascend that capability and maturity ladder over time, we start talking about both more advanced capabilities, like, I don't know, say doing your own malware analysis, producing your own cyber threat intelligence that you can share with others, meeting with other SOCs in related areas of business or industry that to you, all the way to deception operations, orchestrating your response. Orchestration and deception are big buzzwords right now. I do apologize. This journey, getting from the bottom left to the top right, for a lot of SOCs can take 5 or more years. Over that time, their ops tempo, the volume of data that they're looking at, changes substantially. Mistakes can be costly over this. It's very difficult, I have found, and many others have found, to make progress over this period of time. You know, you get caught up in daily operations, and it's hard to devote those resources to advancing your capability. especially if, say, you lose important folks, which is on to my next point. Number 5. When we think about SOCs, we consider the fact that just a couple analysts, perhaps a rock star or a unicorn, equipped with the right tools can be vastly more effective than perhaps 100 analysts with the wrong tools or the wrong processes. One very good example, threat intel fusion. Today, we have the capability to fuse threat intel indicators, again, bad IPs, bad domains, bad file hashes, etc. Pretty pedestrian stuff, really, against data as it streams in near real time at scale, right? We can run indicator lists against historical or near real time data in the hundreds of thousands of indicators and billions of events. We couldn't used to do that over 10 years ago very efficiently, generally anyways. Some SOCs may still do this one indicator at a time. Obviously, there are more efficient ways to do it. Finding those efficiencies is crucial, thus our need to seek out those unicorns. There's a couple things we can do here. Number 1, we need to ensure that we have a strong vetting and check ride process. All the folks who come in the door hopefully have some kind of passion for cybersecurity, and they have an interest in growth. They have a growth mindset. They can come from many backgrounds. Some of the best analysts I've ever met used to work as system administrators. I myself am one, but that isn't necessarily the case. There are great analysts that used to be music majors, English majors, some that don't have degrees at all. Certifications are just one piece of the puzzle, as are degrees. I've met analysts who had no degree. I've met great analysts who had no certifications at all. I have no certifications. Number 2, we want to provide them opportunities for continual improvement. That means they have a career path of perhaps something approximating the cartoon you see on the right here over time. We don't want to see a tier 1 analyst, for example, stay in tier 1 for 5 years. That suggests that there's a problem. There may be a problem because that person is not capable of growing beyond that role. There may be a problem because of perhaps other staffing or managerial issues, but that's a red flag. We want to see people ascending through this ladder. We want to provide them training opportunities. I recognize many SOCs are squeezed for training dollars. Some of the best SOCs I've run into have their own in-house training capability of some sort or another. It could be as simple as brown bags. Hey, I learned a thing. Let me tell you about the thing I did. Awesome. We want to constantly evolve their TTPs. No one wants to sit in a SOC that's doing the same thing today than they were even 6 months ago. And the third thing is we need to pay them. And I would encourage you to go and look at the kinds of dollars involved in paying a mid-level analyst or engineer in a SOC in wherever you live. In the United States, it's not cheap. I won't say numbers, but I can tell you that it's pretty highly stratified. Hence my comment earlier, oh, our one good malware analyst left, what do we do? That's a challenge. Do these 3 things and you'll probably be in a better place. Number 6, there's a tendency amongst many SOCs I run into, I'm guilty of this from time to time, to get involved in the ooze shiny. Man, I get fired up. I get fired up about all kinds of really nerdy things like IOPS and gigahertz and terabytes and all that fun stuff. It's cool getting the new shiny. And there's a tendency to do this in a lot of places. There's a tendency in a lot of SOCs to go and buy the shiny new analytic tool, be it SIEMs or otherwise, the shiny new next-gen intrusion detection, whatever. And you buy it, and you install it, and it sits there for 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, you say, man, that was a terrible investment. Let's go buy something else. And you throw it away, and you go on to the next new shiny thing. Happens all the time. The strategy I espouse here is whereby the SOC practice continual improvement of whatever capabilities it has, big and small, over their entire lifetime. That means a couple of things. Number one, we need to dedicate resources to tuning and analytics. There should be people in the SOC of any substantial size, I would argue, that are going to be regularly tuning the signatures, heuristics, queries, analytics, models, blah, 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 whatever it is you're running, necessary to find bad guys or find anomalous activity. We want to dedicate resources to building custom use cases tailored to our environments. Those again are probably mainly your analytic platform. Traditionally, the SIEM, today a more larger cornucopia of capabilities, and we want to maximize those capabilities. So again, we're operating to engineers' requirements, and we're investing time and making sure that those tools are well cared for and doing all that they can to serve us well over from the time that it's installed to the time that we decide we no longer need it. This journey, I won't go over it in depth here, but this journey goes something like this. You know, back in the day, just before I got involved in this work, the sorts of data sources and things we used to collect that data were pretty sparse. And over time that has grown, particularly with the advent of SIEM tools, which, by the way, some of you think, oh, SIEM, that's just a 4-letter word. I get it. SIEM tools, perhaps more than any other, can be complex to not to install as such, but certainly to manage and to make the most out of. More on that in a second. Over time, 2005, we got those tools. We could bring all data into one place. 2010, our scale continues to grow. The things that we can do on the network grows. Malware detonation chambers became in vogue. The integration to these tools improved and proliferated. At this time, we were probably doing signature IDS. We were probably doing NetFlow. We were probably even collecting full PCAP data. Maybe we're reconstructing it. Today, we see a variety of tools working together. First of all, we want to see strong integration between a lot of capabilities. We want to be able to see the analyst pivot between their SIEM or big data or log management environment, whatever it may be, to where they're managing their indicators, to where they're doing their workflow management. Again, that's your case ticketing and tracking. They should be able to bounce into that. They should, for instance, be able to look at their network sensor or a host sensor that does file carving, again, extracting files of interest, and being able to reconstruct traffic, reconstruct activity on hosts, be able to detonate those files in a relatively safe manner. So if an analyst can't pivot between these tools very rapidly in a matter of seconds or minutes, chances are you probably need to look carefully at the integration story between your tools. I would also offer, by the way, that the SIEM story continues to be more complicated. You see a lot of organizations today, particularly large SOCs, that are running what they call dual stack, SIEM and big data. I mean, they've got their traditional SIEM tool that may or may not leverage big data techniques, and they're running big data tools alongside of it. You know, the Hadoops of the world, for example. Moving forward, I see a couple of things in terms of our focus on our tools and our architectures. Let's look at 3 dimensions here. On the blue axis, we show the different systems we're monitoring. On the green axis, we show the scope of our situational awareness. And on the red axis, we see the scope of our understanding and our cognition of what's going on. I see 2 trends. The first trend, of course, is that everything other than Windows is getting a lot more attention, and necessarily so. And maybe if you're a Linux shop, maybe your attention is growing to things other than Linux. For example, you should probably be doing some kind of instrumentation of your applications, of your IoT devices, of all your other buzzwords. So we're doing all the instrumentation, detection, collection, filtering, blah, 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 across all of that stuff. The second piece is that today, at least traditionally, folks are generally pretty good at bubbling up the results of all of that stuff to the SOC analysts. The question is, how do we provide the results of that situational awareness activities to all the other folks you see here? How do we bring that up to more strategic knowledge of what's going on? And how do we bring that to bear to all the way up to the CEO? How does the CISO, for instance, show up to the boardroom well armed with information that is in any way relevant or intelligible to the rest of the C-suite? Some of the best SOCs I know, by the way, are ones that have monthly engagements with folks at a VP level. Monthly engagements. They're saying, this is what we've been doing lately. These are the things that we're instrumenting as of late. These are where our coverage numbers are. These are our investments. These are some major threats that we're aware of that are actually relevant to you, etc. I could go on here, I won't. Number 7, we wish to exercise discrimination in the data we gather. There's a tendency when you ask an analyst, what data would you like to collect? All of it. How long would you like to keep it for? Forever. Can we do this? Of course not. We need to think about, in a resource-constrained environment, driving our collection based on 3 things. Our coverage goals, the analytic use cases, detective and forensic use cases that we're wishing to support, and our resource constraints. When we think about the dimensions of that coverage at the bottom, we can think of measuring them on no less than 3 dimensions. The attack lifecycle, again, back to the kill chain, or perhaps the MITRE attack framework. Thank you, MITRE. The asset type, again, Windows, Linux, IoT, SCADA, applications, etc. And the logical or physical locality of that collection, meaning which part of your network or enterprise are you collecting from? I would urge everyone to measure their coverage across all 3 of these dimensions. And I would urge you to do so by both percentage and by absolute asset count. And the reason why I make that remark is because when you're measuring just percentage, it's often a moving target. The assets online today are different than the ones yesterday. And if you're always chasing to 100%, trust me, you'll never get there. And if you do, it will be short-lived. Telling both those stories, both in terms of the number of assets we know exist and that are covered, and their overall percentage, will tell your management a more complete story. So, looking at the amount of data we collect on this little cartoon chart here on the right, we have the amount of data on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we have the value of that data. Depending on the tool we collect it into, we may be overwhelmed on the right-hand side or underwhelmed and not working to our capacity on the left-hand side. So we want to find that sweet spot. That sweet spot will depend on which tool you're using to collect your data. Here are some different sweet spots. On the x-axis, we have both the variety and velocity and volume of data, the big V's, if any of you big data nerds out there. The 3 of your big V's, variety, volume, and velocity. And on the y-axis, you have the value of that data divided by the cost of the implementation of the tool in question. So, for example, if you're only monitoring or analyzing, say, perhaps hundreds or thousands of lines of logs, looking at the data with a manual tool may be all right. But as you move to the right, you're going to want to consider systems with increasing robustness, cost, and flexibility. Traditional SIEM tools in the middle, that's the part in green. Moving to the right, sharded or clustered query. And when I say that, I mean in distributed systems where you have a cluster of systems over which you persist your data and query it. An open source example of that would be Elasticsearch, for example, the Elk stack. And then all the way to the right, what we call federated query. What is that? Federated query is a capability whereby I am able to query multiple disparate clusters holding the data that is relevant to me at the same time. And there's some commercial open source tools out there that will do that. I would offer, by the way, the notion of doing federated query, or what I'll also term as cross cluster join, depending on who you are and what technology you're using, is increasingly important because no longer is the SOC the only organization with a large mountain of security relevant data. Usually, they have to go to other organizations to query other people's data. Yes, they can bring it into their own systems, but they need to be able to query other folks. And these technologies allow folks to get and fewer food fights around who gets to control the data and house the data and pay for housing the data and whatnot, and more time actually get the mission done. This data needs to cover a spectrum from data that is immediately actionable to data that provides contextual information. So to the question that was on there, here we go. So if we look at traffic metadata, that helps you establish what really happened, what is going on the network. But it will also, in the presence of our correlation capability, afford you the all kinds of really cool detections. And in some situations, by the way, obviate the need to collect full session traffic capture. And trust me, doing full session traffic capture, PCAP collection at scale in a repeatable manner can be very expensive. Very, very, very expensive. Just ask any SAN vendor. They'll be happy to tell you. So we want to look at this spectrum here, and we want to provide the analyst both the alerts that deserve their immediate attention on the right, those that are actionable, all the way to what helps them understand the ground truth on the left, what helps them understand that context. And as we go from left to right, the volume of that data goes from very huge to very small. We want to bring that whole spectrum to them. Number 8, we want to protect the CSOC mission. So we're here to detect and respond to intrusions, right? It should then follow that we're able to do so even when the APT, the advanced persistent threat, or perhaps even a script kiddie, is running around in our environment. Can we still trust the systems that we're looking at? Can we trust that they're on? Can we trust that the adversary is not looking at the data? Can we trust that the data is intact? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Crazy, no? Well, that means a couple of things. First of all, I would urge you never, ever join the systems that you're using to do the monitoring to the thing that you're monitoring. Don't join them to the Windows domain of what you're monitoring. I would urge you to consider some kind of out-of-band monitoring capability. The manner in which you deploy that is up for discussion. I'll show you that on the following slide. Number 2, we want to be careful about protecting our sources and methods, meaning what we're doing and how we're doing it. 2 examples. First of all, our signature list, at least any of our custom signatures. Probably don't want to post that on a website available to other random constituents. Another example, we probably don't want to share where we're tapping our sensors. Not a good idea. Number 3, we want to, with that said, maintain a carefully manicured degree of transparency with our constituents. We want to be open about our mission. We want to share with them a selection of the whats and the hows of how we get it done. Just enough so that they trust us, but not everything, so they know exactly how we do all the things. That SOC enclave will look like different things to different people. Ultimately, we want to bring as much of the data as we can that the analysts need into one place and have their tools there. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean one site. It could be a distributed enclave. And I would also point out, as I said previously, you're not going to be able to bring all of the data in there, but you can bring as much as you can. We want to minimize the trust relationship between that enclave and outside networks. And we want to fuse our cyber threat intelligence inside that enclave. And have a managed risk tolerance. That said, we don't want it to be a black hole, as I show on the right. A lot of the things we're doing, we want to share with others. How do we achieve those integrations? It's an interesting topic, and probably a whole other talk. Number 9, we want to be a sophisticated consumer and producer of threat intelligence. That means we have a team inside the SOC or a set of analysts or what have you that do the following things. Number 1, they are responsible for extracting information about the adversary from the things that we collect. be it PCAP, hard drives, email attachments, files carved off the wire, perhaps by a bro sensor. Doing malware reverse engineering, that could be in a static sort. That could be an execution or runtime in a detonation chamber or otherwise. They are ingesting cyber threat intelligence and indicators from other organizations. They are fusing locally derived and externally sourced intelligence back into their operations. Those could be signatures, they could be techniques, those could be analytics, etc. They are participating in threat sharing groups. They are maintaining the intelligence repository wherein that information is stored, curated, organized, and fused into other systems. And that, from time to time, they're probably supporting some kind of advanced response capability when they're called upon. But generally, this group does not participate in routine, everyday incident handling. If you were doing any kind of hunting capability, chances are the folks who do this stuff are doing your hunting. By the way, when I say hunting, I mean proactively looking for the presence of an adversary already on your network in a usually open and an open-ended and less structured manner than what, say, Tier 1 analysts do. When we say these things, we want to remember, by the way, that good cyber threat intelligence has the following qualities. It is timely, meaning it is recent, it's up to date, it's relevant to us, it is accurate about what it is describing, it is specific, at least as specific as it can be, and it is actionable. When we think of this group, different people call it different names. One name I've heard is called a cyber threat analysis cell. Here we see another cartoon featuring the CSOC org chart you saw in the first strategy with the CTAC highlighted there in the middle. And they are part of the CSOC. By the way, generally I advise don't have the CTAC somewhere else. We want the CTAC to be well integrated into what the CSOC does and how it does it. We don't want the CTAC thinking themselves the prima donnas of the cyber world. Their focus is to detect, deter, deny, degrade, and deceive the adversary. They are the focal point for all things cyber threat intel. Their TTPs are fused into what the SOC does. And indeed, they may have some shared roles. Maybe you have a CTAC that's a V team, that is composed of folks in other sections of the SOC. Maybe they integrate people from outside the SOC. Maybe they're their own people who all they do is stuff for the CTAC. There are a lot of opportunities here, and no single approach is necessarily right or wrong. When we think about all these capabilities that we're responsible for hosting, we want to make sure that they cover the cyber attack lifecycle and all their TTPs, their techniques, tactics, and procedures cover it. We can think about those in terms of the preventative, detective, and forensic roles that they support. Let's see here. We can probably find a tool like Bro to cover a large section of this because it's going to give us different telemetry at different places. I would actually back up. There's an important point I forgot to make all the way back here. If somebody put a gun to my head and said, you have 2 and only 2 sources of data on your network, I would probably tell you to collect your operating system logs, your security audit logs, and I would tell you to collect network traffic metadata, layers 3 through 7 off the wire. Those are those 2 things I would tell you to do. If you could do no other things, I would tell you to do those 2 things, regardless of the mechanism or tool or vendor you pay to do it. I tell you to do those 2 things because that gives you 2 really excellent, rich vantage points that will help you understand both tip-offs, the actionable pieces, and help you understand the context of what is really going on and see the adversary running around your network. God forbid it happen. It will, trust me. So let's see here. Where were we? Number 10, the last one. When we think about response, think of the SOC as first responders. Part of their job is to show up, assess the situation, and calm everybody down. Think like an EMT. Emotions run high when people think, oh my God, we're being hacked. No, you're not, man. It's okay. It's cool. Don't jump to conclusions, particularly with attribution. This is a big one, right? Just because the adversary is attacking us from the People's Republic of Colorado, does that mean that they're necessarily from there? Could they be from the Socialist Soviet Republic of Massachusetts, for example? Who knows? It requires further analysis. When we think about respecting the mission, we think about responsive actions. We think very carefully about when to throw around our 20-pound sledgehammer or not. When we are in this a situation where we do have a major incident, we want to think carefully about our messaging, our crisis management. How do we message our constituents about what's going on? How do we do so without tipping off the adversary to what we're seeing? Ooh, that's a big one. And we want to think carefully about a response option. Sometimes blocking is not always the best choice. In fact, particularly with APTs, it is a huge detriment. We want to make very careful decisions about when we start causing the APT, for example, to do different things. If we block them coming from a known C2 node, are we going to be able to still see them? That's a good question. Let's be careful. So to round up here, we think about these different strategies. We think that they lay across people, process, and technology issues. And it is only when we consider all three areas are we effective in putting together a good cybersecurity operations capability. Luckily, I wrote about it. It's available in the book you see here. Again, thank you, MITRE, for paying for its authoring and publication. You can download it to this website. It is totally free and worth every penny, I promise. By the way, you can go on Amazon. If you go on Amazon and look for it, those are merely used hard copies that have popped up over time. I promise you the book does not cost $300. You can download it for free. So with all that said, I want to conclude with a point that inspired the front cover of the book that comes from Through the Looking Glass. It's inspired by this quote that actually conjured a phenomenon in evolutionary biology called the Red Queen effect. To put a long story short, in order for Alice to get anywhere, she's trapped by the Red Queen, by the way. In order for her to get anywhere, she constantly has to expend effort to move forward. And in the SOC, the same is true, given the changing enterprise and the adapting adversaries. The SOC has to constantly expend effort to improve its capabilities, improve its processes, technologies, etc., to cope with those situations. And if it's not, it's actually falling behind. So with that point, and 7 minutes left, I open the floor to questions.
Hey, Carson, it's John. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really enjoyable. I definitely learned a lot. We've got a lot of questions and only a few minutes left, so we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but let's jump right into it. Let's see here. We have a question. How common are big data platforms like Hadoop, Spark, and Elastic in SOC based on your experience? And is there a leading technology at this point that you're seeing, or is it evolving too much to say?
I would say it is evolving too much to say. I am optimistic that more SIEM vendors traditionally are adapting big data techniques and what they've deployed, but they had a lot of technical debt to play down there. When I see it, big SOCs, particularly those supporting Fortune 500, Global 2000 sized customers, a lot of them today are running some kind of Hadoop stack, and every Hadoop stack I see is a bit of a snowflake. And what I wish for are more folks to bring that together in a manner that serves the SOC well, that doesn't require them to do a whole bunch of custom integration work or for that matter, have a bunch of Hadoop experts to keep all that stuff running.
Gotcha. All right, we've got another question here. What do you think are the most important metrics to measure and judge SOC performance on?
Interesting question. I hope this wasn't a baited question. I'm actually going to be giving a talk that goes to this very subject at the SANS SOC Summit this summer. I think it's the first week in August in New Orleans. And there I'm going to talk about this very issue and offer some examples. It would be difficult for me to promote any specific metric as saying you got to do this as opposed to anything else. That said, someone's not going to get very far in talking about SOC metrics or really security metrics at all without talking about mean time to detect, mean time to respond, average dwell time of an adversary, and the cost associated with driving those metrics. In other words, both the cost to us as the defenders and the cost to the adversary. And it would also be very difficult to get very far in talking about a SOC and without measuring the completeness and coverage of their censoring, be it purpose-built appliances or security products or just ordinary logs of any sort.
Understood. Let's see, we've got another question here. Any thoughts on best practices or strategies for tuning down false positive volumes in inline products like IDS?
Yep. So, and I'm going to infer by that when you're referring to network IPSs that can operate in both passive and active mode. So there's always two schools of thought. There's one school of thought that says start with nothing and tune up from nothing and only make choices about what you put, what data you choose to collect. And the other school of thought says you start with the default, meaning often everything, and you tune down from that. We could have a religious conversation for an hour or more about those two approaches. I would say that generally, with regards to anything you put in front of your analysts, you probably want to tune from 0, meaning you only put the detections in front of the analysts that you believe they should see. And in some cases, it's easy to say, hey, listen, I'm going to put all AV detects in front of an analyst, regardless of how I feel about AV software. I'm just going to do it. And with regards to network IPSs, the most important thing you always do, right, is you always start in passive mode. That's obvious, right? And then you start measuring how often would that IPS have blocked something, and what would be the impact of that blocking activity. And over time, if you can measure to what extent it can imperil the traffic transiting in the sensor, you can make a judgment to your business owners, your mission owners, and saying, hey, we have this technology, would have only false alarmed this many times, but it would have caught all the stuff over here.
Gotcha. Okay, we are got about 2 minutes left, so maybe 2 more questions here. How do you see the migration to the cloud affecting SOC organizations and responsibilities?
That's a big one. So that one is still a little foggy, pun intended, entirely. It's increasingly difficult to find a security vendor that isn't integrating cloud somehow into their product pitch and their product architecture. Initially we saw it just in terms of sharing threat indicators amongst other instances of that vendor's particular product. But now we see situations where vendors will say, hey, come buy my technology. I will run the entire backend for you. You just deploy my product on your network to do its sensing mission. And I take care of all that big data analytics stuff so you don't have to. That's a big deal. And that's a huge value, right? Trust me, I love keeping this stuff running. It keeps me employed, but in a lot of situations, I'd rather have someone else do that job for me. So when I think about cloud, again, I could have a whole talk on this specific question. I ask a lot of questions. Amongst those questions are the manner in which that other vendor is protecting my data. How are they supporting multi-tenancy? What are they doing to federate that identity story between the SOX tools and any kind of cloud-based console I log into? And I also think about how do they support tuning? And how do they support export, exfil of the telemetry and alerting from that cloud-based technology back to the SOC? Those are amongst the top questions I would ask anyone selling such a technology. And by the way, full disclosure, my day job is at Microsoft, and Microsoft sells cloud-based security technologies. So take that for what you will.
Well, thank you so much, Carson. We're at time. Sorry to those whose questions we weren't able to answer. We can follow up individually afterwards. Just last minute housekeeping here. We will be sending out a recorded copy of this webcast so you can share it with your colleagues. There was a question about whether a copy of the presentation itself would be available. Carson, I defer to you. Would you be able to provide it as a PowerPoint or a PDF?
Well, we're going to have the recording of this that includes the slides, right?
Yes, functionally.
Yeah, let's take that question offline. I am not the copyright holder. MITRE is the copyright holder. Again, thank you, MITRE, for allowing me to continue to speak to these topics. And thank you, Corelight, for hosting.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining today. That's a wrap.